I'll never turn you in. They could pump 1,000,000 volts through me. They could bust my fingers one by one, by one, by one. They could dig out my eyes. But no country western music, please. Every man has his limits.
Look, I thought it was just a game. You know, a stupid video game.
Trust me. Play this.
Hey listeners, welcome to another episode of The Average. It's Tim, and I'm joined with Jonathan again, a regular co-host on the show, if you haven't caught on by now.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
Yeah. All right, we are talking about the first of Jonathan's many suggestions. I'm excited to dive into these. I am super excited to dive into these, but the box office is slow this year. So we're going back 20, 30, maybe more years. We'll see. And pulling out some things that maybe you've never heard of, some things you have. So this movie, well, before we dive into it, I want to talk a little bit about the sponsor for today's episode. So have a little bit of an ad. In a world where reality blurs with the virtual, there is only one game that will push your mind to its limits. Step into a realm where nothing is as it seems. Solve puzzles, unravel mysteries, and confront your deepest fears in this pulse-pounding adventure. But beware, as you delve deeper into the game, the line between reality and fantasy becomes dangerously thin. Are you brave enough to face the consequences? Get ready for a gaming experience like no other. Challenge your mind, test your limits, and immerse yourself in the world of Brainscan. Available now for a limited time only. Play if you dare.
Oh, yeah.
So, okay, we're not actually sponsored by Brainscan, but we're talking about Brainscan today from 1995. This is one I was actually surprised I had never heard of. I mean, I was 6-ish when it came out, so I was young. But I never heard of it after that in my deep dive into these films. So this was a new one for me.
Yeah, this was actually this was a recommendation by my ex stepdad back when I was in like early junior high. He was like, "Oh, it's such a mind trip. You'll love it. It's going to be great." I'm like, "Okay," and it did. It blew my mind. It was a trip for like I was like 12 or 13 years old. I was just like, "Oh my gosh, it was crazy," but crazy film. I really enjoyed it, and I definitely think it's something worth sharing. You know, bring people's attention. Also starring Edward Furlong from Terminator 2.
Yep.
Sadly, he was the fourth Crow. Wicked Prayer. Ew. That was awful.
I never made it. Now
the
we
worst
have
Crow movie ever. Ugh.
Are we on the fifth Crow now?
Yeah. Well, this is like supposed to be the reboot of the first one. Or just another telling of it in a way. I'm open to it. The trailer looks cool, but I don't want to sidetrack too much. But Simon Furlong, Frank Langella is also he's a big actor. He's been in a lot of stuff. I haven't really seen anything lately. I'm not sure if he's still around. I think maybe he is. But pretty cool cast. Such an interesting film and something that really sets a tone for like the time it came out. So
yeah. It was definitely an interesting film. I will give you that one. Let's dive into it. So breaking down our scores, we kick it off with the story. So if you couldn't gather from our little promotional read, the story is about this video game that comes to the character of Michael through his friend. His friend tells him, "Hey, you got to check out this game. It's supposed to be crazy." He calls this 1-800 number, gets this game sent to him in the mail, and it's this virtual reality game, and that sends him really the first level of the game. He has to kill somebody, and he thinks he's playing this game, but then he wakes up and reads that a murder happened, and it sends him on this spiral of like, well, level 2 is there was a witness and you have to take care of the witness, and it blends that reality with what he's playing in the game. And I thought the story was really clever, really unique. I've never seen anything that kind of combines that level of immersive video game reality story quite as much. It is quite literally the violent video games cause real world violence story in a movie.
So, I mean, God, how to really go on about it. So, man, such a cool movie because, like,
go for it. You go on.
The whole concept of it with like how big gaming was getting in the mid 90s, especially with between PC gaming and then having consoles like PlayStation, like the original PS. You know, people were all about it and trying to find all the coolest games and new technologies. You know, the movie Hackers was really big at the time as well, with the whole, you know, electronic scene and computers, what you could do with them. So with this character, with Edward Furlong, and being like this teen who's spent most of the time just chilling at home, you know, he's just so deeply immersed because he's home alone. His dad's usually gone doing whatever, who knows. And so he just gets himself into all these games. He's always looking for the next big thing and the next biggest thrill for this stuff. And likes the shock value of these things too. Mm-hmm. You know, and that was a big thing for a lot of kids at that time who were looking for gaming kind of stuff like that. You know, always looking for the next newest, coolest thing that you can find.
Yeah. And I think that is the hook of this movie that is done so well. And I mentioned back when we were recording Black Roses that I feel like these two movies have that common thread of what you take in influences your actions. Whereas in one, it's heavy metal is going to possess you. And this one, it's video games are going to lead you to murder, basically.
Mm-hmm.
They have that kind of... What?
It's an old video game violence.
Yes, exactly. They have that kind of social commentary in their story. And this movie is very interesting in that regards. I gave the story a 4. There's elements of it that I don't really care for. Like you mentioned, is his dad even in the movie?
No, you never see Dad. Dad is completely absent. There is no character for that one.
Okay,
so it doesn't really come into play at all.
Because he's got that tragic backstory with his mom dying in a car accident. And that's how the movie opens. And it kind of sets this very somber mood at the beginning. But then we're thrown into this like completely parentless world for this kid, which was interesting. But I don't think I needed the mom's backstory other than it is used later in a line. But the story itself, the idea of the video game corrupting your real world actions, was definitely a fascinating one.
Yeah, because that's the other part of it also is the fact that you've got this some sort of spirit, this trickster character, some sort of portrayal, maybe a trickster god. Yeah, absolutely. You know, oh my God, that guy did such a great job. T. Ryder, was it? Yeah, T. Ryder Smith. Dude is big with voiceovers in lots of game stuff too, surprisingly. And it makes sense because like his tone, his sound, he probably could do quite a lot with that and how he could portray a character, especially in this kind of way. So seeing, you know, like how that plays into it with that trickster figure and then this young naive soul, you know, and trying to corrupt them and take over, you know, it's a pretty classic concept when you think about it throughout, you know, stories through history.
Definitely. So then what was your score on that one?
I gave it a 4 also.
You gave it a 4 as well? Okay.
Yeah, I was for it.
We're in agreement that the story is pretty. 4 would make the story great. So into the character, we kind of mentioned there's really 2 main characters in this film, the trickster and Michael, Edward Furlong's character. And that's the core of the movie. Most of the movie is carried through Michael. And he's got a supporting cast of the girl across the street that he has a crush on, and then his best friend.
Yep.
And the detective. I forgot about.
Detective Hayden for Frank Langella. Yeah. That was your pretty much those four were your main cast and crew.
Yeah. And you see Michael go on this, he has somewhat of an arc. I wasn't thrilled with it, and I'll get into that a little bit. But he is that weird kid in school. He doesn't think he's weird, but we hear later, like, the other kids think he's weird. He's the one who loves horror movies, and he brings, I love the scene when he brings the movie Death, Death, Death to school and is showing that at school. You know, it sounds great. I want to watch it. But he brings that, and that's definitely another one of those things that, like, this is influencing you. You're going to go commit real world crimes. But he starts out that way. And I just get the impression he's kind of a sad kid. He's a loner. He's sad. That the death of his mother definitely hangs heavy on him. And the movie is also trying to comment through his character, I feel like, about the absentee father. I couldn't watch this without noticing there are no parents. And I didn't think that was an accident.
No, not at all. I mean, because, you know, you look at him, yeah, he's kind of like the weird kid because, you know, one, he lost his mom early in age, so you know that's going to have an effect on a kid. Then he's also had the injury with his leg, so he also walks a little bit off, not like everybody else. So, you know, people, you know, kids in high school are cruel like that, you know, so they may bag on him for that. Who knows what kind of stuff he's dealing with.
Right.
But so, you know, and with mom being dead, dad being gone all the time working, probably got his own issues with the situation that we never really hear anything about. You know, you've got your character who is just, he's seeking attention. So that's why he seeks that shock value with all the horror movies and stuff and all the game things that he comes across. So it is very telling about the character and how he's got that lack of confidence to start and how that changes, you know, up until the very end of the movie as he deals with all these trials and trying to figure this out.
Yeah. And so I'm interested to hear, we have not discussed this movie together at all. This is our first time. But as he goes, he commits that crime and he's horrified at the idea that the game caused him to murder somebody. And then he continues to do what the trickster says, but he is adamant, no more killing, no more killing. I'm not going to kill anybody. But he continues to try to, he doesn't want to get caught. He doesn't want to get punished for it. And so he's along for the ride, but he kind of draws a line on, like, I'm not going, this is where I'm not going, and I'll stop there. And that's going up through the movie until that final scene when he has to, I believe the trickster is telling him to kill the girl that he has a crush on, and he can't do it. And the thing that rubbed me the wrong way, I'm fine with this. I think this is a good storyline because he kind of faces his inner demons through a plot twist that I was interesting. That's good. But then what I didn't like, maybe I didn't understand it, maybe you can explain it a little better, was I was like, this is a good arc. This is good. But then at the end of the movie, he goes back to his principal and he hands him the game. I think you should play it. And so did he change? Did he learn anything from it? Because that scene made me think he had this interesting arc and then he gave it up and is still the same exact kid we knew from the beginning.
Yeah, except, you know, as he by the end of the movie, though, he's got this new profound sense of confidence and sees things differently than he did prior, you know, with the kind of sad state that he was living in. You know, and then through what he experiences in the game, it gives him the confidence to go out and do something different, to get out of his shell. You know, him and his friend both to go to that party and go talk to that girl, to go talk to his neighbor that he's hot on.
That's
fair. So he gets that change. And now it's like, okay, now it's time to pass this on. Maybe there's someone else who could use kind of like a reawakening themselves, you know, and then passing it on. And then the trickster does his work. Teaching lessons, and that's a big thing throughout cultures across the world with trickster figures, is that even though stuff's crazy, sometimes it's evil, there's lessons to be learned.
Right.
You know, with a lot of trickster figures, there's always a lesson to be learned. And that's kind of the thing. He learned a lesson. Now it's time for somebody else.
That makes sense. I think I don't know why I kind of gloss over that. I think what rose to the surface for me was that kind of the boy girl storyline of he now has the confidence to go ask that girl. But I was like, this movie has gone out of its way to talk about music as an influence, video games as an influence, movies as an influence, and where that could lead him in life through that, like, oh, you killed somebody and now you're living a life of crime, whatever. And then that goes away and it's all about his confidence now and talking to that girl. And so there was a little bit of a disconnect for me, and it's probably me. I didn't quite register.
Well, it's crazy because, you know, throughout like the beginning of the movie and then throughout the middle a little bit, you see that he's kind of creeping on her from across the way with his camera.
Yes,
you know,
kind of creeping on her. He's
okay. No, so
really
he's straight. He's straight creeping. He's being a teenage creep. There's no way around it. He's being a teenage creep with his video camera, checking her out all the time.
She kind of knows.
But then towards the end of the movie, after trying to save her, he finds out that she's a bit of a creeper, or she is a creeper too, because she's been watching him with her actual photography camera and taking photos of him.
Creeping back.
So they're perfect they're perfect creeps for each other. You know, it's crazy. Yeah, it's nuts. But yeah, they're street creeping, and then you've got the whole situation between the main character and then the police officer. Oh man, like ever from Frank Langella, there was kind of a weird kind of like play between those two throughout the story, and just not great. The cop, you know, as Frank Langella is the police officer, I think they could have done more on that, you know, as far as like how they had him run that part of the story. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. That story, that part of the story, I'm not exactly sure. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure what it does other than move the story along. The detective looking into the case is why Michael has to do the next step.
More tension for the protagonist.
Yes. Because there's really, like, after the final confrontation, there's a reason why everything the detective does doesn't matter ultimately. And I'm sure we'll discuss that ending. For me, the overall character arc, I did give it a 3. I thought it was a good character arc. We brought up some of the good qualities about it, but I watched it twice and there was still just a disconnect on me figuring it out. I don't know why. I missed a little bit on it.
Well, I mean, you got to remember, so like after they finding out that he killed the guy and then him trying to hide, and like he had all that tension going to the woods, trying to find the foot, you know, that the dog tried to take away from him, you know, trying to get that back so nobody finds it. And then finding out there's a witness that he has to go kill, you know, and then it turns out to be his friend, Kyle.
That
scene, so he has to kill his friend.
That scene was the tensest scene to me.
Yeah.
When he finds out he has to kill his best friend.
It's like, it's also the only person I talk to, and I got to kill this guy. No.
Yeah, it's also the most disappointing scene to me, and I'll get to that later. Right. I'll get to that later. Yeah, I give it a 3 overall. You? So I said the character arc was good.
I gave it a 4. I kind of identified with being the lonely kid and looking for more attention stuff, you know, and then, you know, finally meeting, you know, through some action, meeting someone or some trials, you know, you develop a little more and you become a little more thick skinned, you become more confident, you know. So I kind of like how it turned out. The fact that especially it was, you know, it was all virtual for him in his head eventually. I was like, thank God. I give it a 4. I went 4 on the character development.
Good. This whole podcast exists to celebrate the way people see movies differently. So that's why we're here. So the next one, the music and sound. I mentioned they use kind of the movies, the music, and the video games that influence him to be who he is as this 13, 14-year-old kid. At least he seems 13 and 14 years old. And they mentioned the music. And the music in this film that is licensed or written from bands for the film is fantastic.
Yes.
There's a lot of great rock tracks in this.
So many good bands, dude. That's one thing I really appreciated about this movie was they had such a great soundtrack. A lot of stuff that was really rocking pretty hard in the mid '90s at the time. You got I've never heard of Alcohol Funny Car. Never familiar who that is, but Mudhoney, White Zombie, Primus, Tad, Pitch Shifter, and Butthole Surfers. And then George Clinton did the main title theme. So like you had a lot of heavy hitters and some really raw tracks that were going on that really lent to the sound of the time that, really made things really feel like that's when it's going on.
I loved some of that music. My favorite scene of the entire film is the first person killer POV murder scene. Yeah, that scene is amazing, but the music in that scene is awesome. The music in that scene makes that scene so much better. It's just heavy metal. I don't know what band was in that scene, but I was surprised because it sounded more modern than I expected for 1995. But I was like, man, this is good stuff.
Dude, they had a lot of great music production in the 90s, especially from like the alternative college rock scene, just straight alternative. Just the rock that was going on at the time, and then stuff that was coming out that was, all grunge and starting to lean more towards the new metal genre that was starting to come around. You had a lot of like heavy industrial stuff going on, like Skinny Puppy and Nine Inch Nails at the time too. That kind of helped shape a lot of the sound and part of that soundtrack that you hear.
Yeah. The rock tracks in this, fantastic. I had to dock a point because the actual composed music for the film is not much to remember. In fact, my wife and I were both watching it like an hour before we recorded this.
Yeah.
And we commented that some of the music that isn't provided by bands sounds like the music from the TV show Twin Peaks. It sounds very similar to the structure, the setup, just kind of, it sets an atmosphere, which is fine. It's just not super memorable. However, those rock tracks are awesome. I immediately looked at the soundtrack to see if it was streaming. I couldn't find it streaming. Again, we mentioned the Black Roses soundtrack is a collectible item, and so is this soundtrack. Apparently, the cassette that was released for this movie is a collectible item. I saw that online.
Yeah,
so
nice.
It's a solid soundtrack.
I want to say, I can't remember, I just go back and watch it. I want to say that the song that was playing during the first murder scene was Butthole Surfers.
Okay. That sounds right. I looked it up the first time I watched it, but that was like a month ago now. But yeah, I'm going to have to see if I can find that. The song was great. So I did give the music for this film and sound design, I give it a 4. It's pretty great.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think we were tied on that one, were we not?
Yeah, I had 4. Yeah.
Yep. All right. So the editing and special effects category. This movie does some cool things. It's got a lot of cool ideas as far as special effects. It's definitely one of those, I don't say early 90s, but it was mid 90s films where the computer technology was there. It wasn't great. And they mixed some good practical with some computer. Some of it to varying degrees of success. Some of it looks really good. Some of it not so much. But there's a lot of the character himself of the trickster, T. Ryder Smith's character. The makeup on him is great. Yeah,
they did great character design on that.
Yeah, he's very memorable, very interesting. There's multiple times that you look at him and I think he has finger extensions on. He has longer nails.
Yeah.
But then there are other times that his fingers are like all the way up to it's crazy. The scenes when his Edward pokes his eyes out.
Oh, that was great. Oh man.
Like that was great. I mentioned the actual murder in this film, the first murder, is done so well from editing to effect to execution. It's not just executed well. It's almost my first time. I was like, whoa, what am I in for? Because it was almost hard to watch because the guy doesn't die.
Not right away, no.
Yeah, he just keeps waking up and he just keeps moving. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is awful. Yeah. And then he's like, why don't you do something memorable and cut off his foot? And then he's sawing off his foot. And the guy wakes up again and you're like, oh, I'm going to pass out.
He was faking that he was passed out. It's like, ah.
Yeah. It's not over the top gratuitous with gore or anything like that. It's bloody, but it's one of those scenes that it is a first person, 90% first person. There's a couple of shots that aren't. First person POV from the second Michael walks in that house, up the steps, into the bedroom, spies the guy. That scene is the peak of this movie for me. That scene was done so well. I love that scene. I wish we would have gotten some more like that later, but that scene is done really well.
Yeah, with the facts, the practicals were cool, but it was the computer generated stuff that I found about more impressive. It wasn't top notch or anything for the time, but it was still pretty good for '95 in comparison with a lot of other stuff they were putting out then. It's not something that really got a lot of fanfare necessarily, but it still had a lot of cool stuff for like what they had to work with for the budget and everything with their technology. And just like how the trickster, like his appearances and his fade outs, disappearances and stuff and everything that went into that. And then like after Edward Furlong like destroys the one disc that he got and then trickster uses blood to make a new one, that was cool. Some cool stuff out of that,
Yeah. Well, you mentioned how he first appears. How he first appears is kind of crazy cool when he just pops out of the TV and then knits from like nerves to skeleton to organs to muscle. And then he's physically standing there and it's done really fast. And it doesn't look as real as something today might have, but I was impressed for 95. I was like, that looks pretty good.
Yeah, they had some good stuff working with it. It's nothing great you could really compare it to today, but they had some pretty decent stuff going on then.
Yeah, it was definitely good. It was definitely good effects on that. My biggest issue is when it comes to the effects. So this would be the reason why I gave it a 3 and said it was good, not great. Because it had great scenes, but that ending when they like melded together was rough. That was rough. I was like, that one didn't age too well. This is one where I think they missed an opportunity, and I understand why. A lot of movies at that time did that when they were like, hey, computer generated stuff is cool, let's use it. But if they had gone for a practical like body meld scene that would have been way more involved, I also think it would have launched up like the realism of that scene a little bit more. I'm a sucker for the practical.
So when I saw something like that, it made me think for some reason, it just made me think back to like the graphic special effects for like Lawnmower Man. Have you ever seen that?
I need to see that one. I need to see
Lawnmower and Lawnmower Man 2, dude. Yeah, both of them pretty cool movies.
Is that?
Yeah.
What's the
second one had the much better graphics, of course, being later on, but the effects, some of the graphic effects you see in Brainscan kind of just made me think a little bit of Lawnmower Man.
Yeah. Well, what was the movie? Oh, we did it for 13 Nights of Halloween, The Frighteners. So if I were The Frighteners from 1996, so a year after this one, it obviously had a bigger budget, Michael J. Fox, Peter Jackson, but the special effects in that movie were top notch.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was pretty good one. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's hard to look at this a year apart. And like there was that scene popping out of TV, loved it. I think that scene's great. I'm not docking it for that. But I do think that, like, that final climax, knowing this is definitely lower budget than The Frighteners was, that final scene, that climactic body meld scene, I even second watch, I was like, man, when his like guts pop out and wrap around his hand, I was like, that is awesome. And I immediately started thinking about Nightmare on Elm Street stuff and all the crazy body effects that they did in those later movies. And I was like, this would have been really cool if they had done a body meld night a la Nightmare on Elm Street. So that is where I was at on the effects, because there's a lot of good effects in this film, but then there are some that haven't aged super well.
Yeah, of course, but it's also cool, like seeing like in the Edward Furlong's room, like the technology set up for the time too.
That is sweet.
All the computer tech and stuff he has.
What does he call that little like his artificial intelligence that he has set up in his room? Oh
God, like Igor, I think.
Yeah, Igor.
Yeah,
and he'll just tell him, dial this. It's basically Siri. He has Siri.
I know, right? It's like, oh, dude, like, oh my God, it's like Alexa,
that was pretty cool. That was pretty cool. So, what did you give editing and special effects?
Editing and special effects, I gave it a 4. I grew up in that time, so that was something I was really used to a lot at that time. So, like for me, yeah, I give it a 4. It was good.
Before we jump into the next category, I want to tell you a little bit about Zencastr. When I was preparing for our 13 Nights of Halloween series, I was really searching for a way to streamline the process. I wanted a professional-looking setup to invite our guests to. I wanted quality audio and video recording, and I wanted the easiest way to release the episodes to as broad of an audience as possible. This is how I landed on Zencastr. It is now super easy to record a podcast with Zencastr. Just log in using your browser and start recording a high-quality podcast right away. Record studio-quality sound and up to 4K video with your guests. Feel a sense of zen knowing Zencastr's multi-layered backups ensure you always have your recordings in the highest quality, even if the connection is unstable. And speaking of audio quality, have you ever worried what you sound like? Zencastr's post-production process makes you sound buttery smooth. It automatically removes those ums and ahs in your recording. It removes those awkward pauses in conversation too. Set the podcast loudness and levels while reducing background noise with the click of a button. So if you're thinking of starting your own podcast or just want to streamline what you are already doing, go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my code AVERAGECUSTOMER and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencastr paid plan. That's average customer, one word. I want you to have the same easy experiences I do for all of my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story. So let's dive into the next category. All right, here's a rough one for me. We're diving into the script.
Yeah.
We're diving into the script.
There's some qualms there for sure.
So I always have a hard time figuring out if my problem is with the story or my problem is with the script. And I generally think of story as the premise. The big idea of the film is the story. The script is how that gets communicated. And I ultimately realized my problems with this film fell onto 3 things. And one of them was the script. So the script, and it's because I can't tell if it is the script or if it's the acting. And I'll get into that one.
There's a blend there. There's a blend there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Correlation.
But on my second watch, there were moments that there are moments where the script is solid. I think most of the trickster's lines are really good. But I was reading, this film was originally written to be a horror comedy. And then they decided to pull back on the comedy. And I personally think that was a mistake.
Really? I don't know, man. I'm not sure how the comedy would have played in so well.
Well, I feel like the trickster character is a comedic character. That's the way he always came across for me. And maybe that's where like I wasn't viewing it correctly, because he does these funny, he's eating bananas with mustard at one scene. I'm like, how is that not meant to be comedic? But I feel like he's pulled back from being a fully comedic horror character. And I'm not sure why, but I feel like that's where I felt like the script was a little bit off. I feel like there were moments that it wanted to play into that funny, and the trickster does that even with his like I love the scene about he's talking about music and you don't have anything good in here, and then he says something
Pulls
about
out the Primus. He pulls out Primus and puts the Primus CD in there, and starts going off. Let's just jump around to some Primus. I'm like, yeah, bro.
Yeah, it's a great scene. And then he ends that scene with like, but please no country western. Every man has his limits. And I'm like, that's funny. Are we leaning into that? Because I think if you balance comedy and horror in a character, him, you can make it way menacing, way more menacing. You can make it sinister comedy. You can do that successfully. I don't think this did that successfully. But there's also just weird. Go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, because like with the character, I'm kind of glad they didn't get too far with the comedy of it, because as the story goes on, you know, he's very casual and goofy at the start with Edward Furlong, but then as it goes on, things get more serious. It's like, because of the lessons that, you know, Edward Furlong eventually learns throughout the movie, it's like as things go further, the trickster is getting more strenuous about trying to get these lessons across by putting all this tension on him. So he has to kind of divert a little away from the comedy back towards more of the serious darkness of things, you know, to try to push that change and make an influence, make him do something instead of just kind of brushing it off because being comedic. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. And that is something I picked up on second watch, and what you said earlier about the trickster character kind of being the moral lesson character in a lot of old stories. And I did not pick up on that the first time, but I definitely agree with that on the second watch, because I realized first time I'm thinking the trickster is the corrupting character. He's the one coming in, messing up his life, leading him down a wrong path. But then on second watch, I was like, no, he's the one using these things to teach him a lesson.
Well, it varies from culture to culture. You know, it's its main theme to like teach a lesson through some kind of hardship and whatnot. And, you know, through weird backdoor deals and stuff. And in some cultures, their trickster character is much darker than that, you know, with reality of things, you know, versus the comedic type. You know, it varies, you know, no matter where you look at it. Yeah, I actually did when I did my internship for AI, I was at the Trickster Native American Art Gallery in Schaumburg, and I was interning there. And at the time, one of the other student groups was doing a big exhibit about trickster figures, which I got to do some illustrations for that went up as part of the displays. And there was like, what is a Baron Samedi from like voodoo culture. You know, there's and between him and then there's Mbeku, which is this turtle figure out of Africa, Native American culture. They've got their own versions. And then like, you know, Norse culture, Celtic culture. There's just so many different characters that are these trickster characters that are teaching these lessons, but each have their own little quirks and twists about them, you know?
Yeah. See, the trickster characters are something I'm not super familiar with, but now I'm curious.
It's definitely worth checking out. You find some amazing stories about trickster characters throughout history and different cultures.
I spent all week watching conspiracy theories about Antarctica. So that's tricksters will be lined up for next week.
All right.
So ultimately, the other things that kind of some of the interactions with the kids just felt a little awkward. There was one scene we mentioned where the dog was carrying the foot through the woods and Michael was trying to hide. And he says something to the dog about like, I'll never ask for anything again. And I was like, this isn't your dog. This is a random dog you saw in the woods. Why would you tell it you wouldn't ask for it? So, and I know
it's not the first time it happens. It's not the first time it happens too. Where he has to interact with the dog and be like, please, I would never ask for anything. And just, because like when he's hiding from everybody, when they're searching, like the neighborhood's out and about, and he has to hide in that that construction site, and he has to cover himself. The dog comes down there, and he's like, "Oh God, please don't expose me."
Yeah, and there were a couple of things that I was like, "This." I don't want to say it was lazy. It was just like maybe there was a better way to write that scene. So I think it had a great idea. I'm not sure it was always executed great. The final reveal that the neighbor girl is also Peeping Tom is both fantastic, but okay. So also ultimately, we haven't revealed the major spoiler of the movie is that it was all a dream, or it was all inside the game. And he wakes up and nothing ever happened, and he's back to the same night that the party's going on across the street. So in the game, the girl is a Peeping Tom too. And that whole scene is hilariously awkward. And there is a little bit of like, is it his fantasy that she's also creeping on him? Or because then in the real world, he goes and asks her out and she's like, I don't know. And he's like, that's not a no. He takes it. But there's definitely not that. Yeah, there's definitely not that confession of like, yeah, I creep on you too. I'm definitely down for this. Or like, she doesn't say like at the beginning, like, yeah, I take my shirt off because I know you're watching. Which is the impression I got at the beginning. Well,
it seems like she knows, like she has an idea that she's being watched. Like,
Yep. Let me just stand here with my shirt off for too long in one position in front of the window.
Right.
That scene is hilarious. Ultimately, this is where I docked the movie the most was the script. I gave it a 2. I said the script was okay. The balance of the comedy when I felt like it wanted to be funny and then it wasn't. And when it wanted to be serious, I felt like the balance was off. I'm not sure I know the answer for that. And some of those lines, some of those scenes seemed repetitive and like hiding from the dog. Probably could have written it a little differently, a little better. Almost seemed to drag on some of those scenes a little too long, but 2 is okay.
I gave it a 3.
It's a 1 point difference. Yeah. All right. So jumping into the acting, I actually was reading that there was some tension off set for this. Oh. Yeah. So
spill the tea, bro.
I've seen Edward Furlong, T2. And then I saw him he was actually in a Christian horror movie in the early 2000s.
What?
It was called The Visitation, where he was really good in it. He plays this cult leader that is like leading revivals in this barn, and it's possessing people. It was I remember seeing it when it came out. I thought it was actually really good, but I was 15, so I don't know if I don't know if it'd still be good today.
Yeah, I don't believe I've seen this. No.
Yeah. I want to see if I can find it. I'm not sure where to stream it. That would be a fun one to talk about. But I remember thinking he was fantastic in that film. He had a good reputation as a child actor, but there was something weird about this movie that I couldn't put my finger on. And ultimately, I was reading that the director and Edward did not like each other.
Oh.
So director John Flynn did not get along with Edward Furlong during filming. He later recalled that Eddie was a 15-year-old kid who could not act. You had to slap him awake every morning. This is a quote. You had to slap him awake every morning. I don't want to get into knocking people, but I was not a big Eddie Furlong fan. And that's from the director.
Okay. All right. Yeah, definitely some animosity going on there.
Yeah, I'm not here to say that Edward Furlong is a bad actor, but I do think he was bad in this movie. And so I think that has to do more with there's some clear tension between the director and the actor. And from what I gather of this movie, I don't think the director was giving clear instruction.
Yeah, I guess I could get along with that for sure. I mean, like T. Ryder Smith, he did well with the trickster character. I didn't really get too much of an issue with that. He did a great portrayal, very, very open and physical, very boisterous. You know, there's a lot of presence there. But then, like with Edward Furlong and then like Frank Langella and a few of the other characters, it still seemed a little more stagnant in performance versus what you get in contrast with him.
Yes.
You know,
it's stiff. Everybody seems a little stiff except for T. Ryder Smith.
I would say the best friend Kyle. I think he did okay. I think his acting was pretty decent and it worked well as just that kind of a goofy, aloof friend. Just is more carefree about things than Michael is. So that was okay. The girl across the way, Kimberly, though, definitely kind of meh, so on the performance there as well. There was something lacking there.
She didn't really do much. It looked like she was in maybe 3 things.
Yeah, very, very low key. She didn't get a lot of action on the acting scene.
Yep. But it was tough for me. So I ended up giving the acting a 3. And then since we're going to get into the directing shortly after, and I feel like that had a bigger impact, I gave the acting a 3, but the directing a 2.
See, I went with 3 on the acting. Direction, I gave that a 3 as well. I thought it was pretty menial, or not a menial, but it was just kind of on an average wavelength there. Just because of like that feeling about the direction, like you were saying, with the characters and how they portray their roles. Maybe they weren't given enough to really work with what they were looking for to have happen. Right.
Yep. And I on second watch, I was like, man, Eddie Furlong's not good. And then I was like, no, he is. I've seen him in other stuff. He could act. But there were times in this movie when I wasn't sure. Like he'd be all upset about like, oh my God, I just murdered somebody. And then it seems to have no effect on his scene, the immediate next scene. And I'm like, that is the director's fault for not conveying.
Part of that also, that itself could play into the next section with the it factor cultural significance part, which I have something to say on that. We'll get to that. But
yeah, we're moving right along at the end. But T. Ryder Smith balances out the acting because he is interesting every time he's on the screen. He is very interesting as the trickster. He has a great performance. I was surprised to see that this was his first live role, but it's a memorable character. The direction, like I said, I gave it a 2. There were some things in this movie that were great ideas. Like I mentioned, that first person POV kill scene is genius. I think it's so good. It's a great idea.
Well, you didn't really see a lot of the first person stuff in films, back then, it just wasn't a common thing.
Yeah. But then we talked about like there were other scenes where it seemed like he couldn't really get his actors to the place they needed to be for the gravity of what was happening. And it's not just one scene or one actor. It seemed to be pretty widespread. And there was a little bit of my biggest disappointment, I'll put it in direction, is probably one of the most powerful scenes this movie could have had is level 2 when he has to kill his best friend. And he just he's like, oh, I'm going to see what goes on. And then he just wakes up and he already did it. And
he tries to record himself to see what happens. And then it turns out there's nothing.
Yeah. But then he finds out that his friend is dead. And I was like, wait, this is really the crux of the film. He went from killing a stranger, fine, I guess. I don't condone it, but it was interesting. And that scene was done really, really well. And then the next one is killing his best friend, the person that is probably most important to him in his life. And it is glossed over entirely. It happens, and he's like, all right, move on. Guess what? You left footprints. You gotta go take care of that. And I was just like, that scene, that story point, like, it's a great story point. I don't know what the director was doing by making that such a small part of the story.
I don't know. I think maybe they just were just trying to rush through because of time constraints, trying to fit it all within like a regular, film length, possibly. There were some other parts I think they could have cut out, with some of like the police scenes walking around and then the people like doing the neighborhood watch stuff. There's some bits that could have been trimmed out a little bit, I think.
Yes.
To give room for other things, if that is the case. I feel like maybe they lingered a little too much on some scenes. And then this, as far as the direction goes, especially at that point where he's going to like try and rub out those footprints in that flower bed, and then trying to run away, guy running after him, that one lone guy who's not even part of the neighborhood watch is out. He's out on the hunt now. And then just like those interactions with him and all the other people, and like between the guy getting shot and killed, the lack of like more concerned response from the crowd, and then the police officer when he shows up, there was just kind of dead action, like there should have been more force in that, and the seriousness was it. But Edward Furlong just like, okay, thank God the dog didn't rat me out again, and scoot off he goes, Yeah, there's so much more they could have done with that, and I think that was definitely lacking direction there a bit as well.
Yep. That is ultimately where I landed on the 2 for the direction. So you said you had some thoughts for the it factor.
Right. So the lack of response, or certain emotional responses or certain like heightened levels of it with like killing his friend and killing the first guy and the seriousness of trying to save the girl and everything, and with the kind of the point that they're trying to make, I think, in one way with the film, with music and video games and the violence in all of the video games and how that messes up kids. And I don't think it maybe messes up some kids, but there's certainly a level of desensitization that happens when you see a lot of graphic blood and guts, gore kind of stuff. And as games were progressing in graphic capability and technology at the time, that was starting to become more of a bigger issue because it wasn't just your 2D side scroller Zelda kind of stuff, anymore. So with everything you do with PC gaming, there was a lot more crazy stuff going out. Yeah, Wolfenstein. Yeah, it was one of the early, like, really bloody games that people were kind of getting up in arms about. But when you see a lot of that stuff and you're a kid who's all alone, mom's gone, mom's dead, dad's out working, wherever, you're alone all the time, you immerse yourself in something to be distracted from your loneliness. And you get that desensitization, and it helps lend to certain kind of reactions like that. That's why there's certain serial killers out there. I think, I'm not really knowledgeable on it, but they are so desensitized from the way they've grown up, the way they've been treated in life, and the things they immerse themselves in and expose themselves to, the nature versus nurture, the things that are environmental that you deal with all the time that lead to that desensitization, that lack of response in certain ways. So, I mean, that's part of a big issue that, people were going on about at the time, and still kind of do to an extent now even.
Yeah. So I ultimately had to give, this is the one that somehow it's still subjective, even though the it factor is really supposed to be cultural, but it always depends on when this person reviewing sees the film. And I try to go back and look at like, okay, box office wise, did it do well? Whatever. This film was considered a critical and financial failure and was withdrawn from cinemas 2 weeks after its release.
People just didn't know what they were missing out on.
That to me is depressing. I do think that is sad. It's always sad to see somebody put energy and effort into something and for it not to be received. I think that is sad at its core. But since then, there's been a cult following that's grown. I mean, the teenagers at the time, kids at the time who saw this movie and identified with it have now grown up and are passing it along and showing it. Like you recommending it to me. So there is that little bit of cult following to it. So I averaged that out and I gave it a 3 on the it factor. I think it is probably, I think it's probably more popular today than it was when it was released, but it's still a movie that I hadn't heard of until you brought it up to me. So it is a tough one, but ultimately I give it a 3.
Yeah.
So on to the last, our overall entertainment value.
I put myself at an 8. It's something I wouldn't mind watching again. It's been a long time, of course, since I last saw it, but yeah, I give it an 8. I liked it overall. You know, the story, as far as the story, the concept, characters, with the whole trickster figure, and then the graphic, and the music especially. You know, that did a lot for me, especially with the music. You know, that's always going to be a good way to hook me. And so, yeah, I'm pretty solid on the 8. Yeah.
Good. So for me, this one was a 6. I found myself at moments between key story points, like you mentioned, some of those scenes that you thought could have been cut. I was a little bit like, I'm bored. What is this? Yeah. Why is this going on? But I like the idea of it. I like that idea of the kid kind of being isolated in his own world and going down a dangerous path and then learning his lesson. I like that overall idea, and I've never seen anything quite like this before. My overall enjoyment of it was, I was telling my wife afterwards, was I think the major disconnect on this film for me, and not disconnect in like it ruins it, but the reason why things don't click quite right for me was because it felt like a movie for kids that was rated R. And I'm like, they're like, as a kid, I get why, and that's the problem. This movie probably should have been rated PG-13.
No, with the gore, with the blood and stuff, that I would say R is reasonable for the rating. I wouldn't go with PG-13.
Okay.
Some of the themes and content, yeah.
Well, see, I think that's where my issue is. I wish they would have either leaned into that R more or pulled back from it more. Trimmed. We didn't need the underage girl across the street taking her top off at the beginning of the movie. That doesn't need to happen. We can take that off. Yes, the actress was 20 something, but she's playing a high schooler. We can cut that. We can cut the gore and still get the idea. And I think it might work a little better. Or we can go the opposite and lean into it more. And I just felt like it played some things safe and played some things to be edgy. And that's where I said it felt like, I told my wife, I said, it feels like an hour and a half Goosebumps episode. It is an hour and a half Goosebumps episode that is rated R.
You know, that's not a bad comparison. I can work with that. Yeah, it's
not necessarily a bad thing, but I felt like the quality, some of the acting, some of the lines, all of that around is like, hey, let's take this Goosebumps concept, stretch it to an hour and a half, and make it R-rated. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds great on paper. It sounds great on paper, and it makes for a pretty entertaining film. I was 6 out of 10. I would watch it again. It's not one I'm gonna go grab right away. But it is.
It's a casual whenever rainy day film or whatever. If you're feeling spunky, you know.
Yeah, put it on rainy day, trapped in the basement, especially in fall. It's great. There's some stuff in this movie I really like. Like I said, I really like the whole concept. The whole premise of this movie is really interesting. I am not sure. There are 2 major issues that maybe you can answer.
Okay.
Other than, I guess, the mother's death leads into the isolation for the character. I get that. I don't get how the trickster is Michael. Because in that final climactic scene, Michael asks the trickster, "Who are you?" And he says, "You haven't figured it out yet? I'm you." And I'm like, what?
I think that's just more of a mind twist. That kid needs some serious psychological help, maybe some meds.
He's just messing with him.
Yeah, because I mean, it's just he's the trickster. He's got to mess with you. He's got to get the last jab in before he's done with you. Okay. You know, yeah, always have that hook in there. You know, so that's my perspective on it, though. Yeah.
Okay. Yep, that was one of those where I was trying to. So the first time it took me by surprise. I was like, "What?" And then the second time I'm trying to connect those dots and see like how he in the future physically becomes the trickster. And then I was like, that's not working out. So that makes sense to him. Just like I'm you more theoretically than actually, like
your fears, your frustrations, your insecurities, all the pent up stuff that you can't get out in a healthy way. I'm that.
Okay. That makes sense. So overall, my final score is a 3 or a 30 out of 50, which would put it at 3 stars out of 5.
Oh, sassy. Well, I'm at with my stuff. I'm at a 36 out of 50.
So you're 3.5 stars out of 5.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're ultimately, despite our differences, we're not that far off on the film. But I was grateful that you suggested this one. I love watching new movies, things I haven't heard of. It's why I started this whole podcast, because my wife was sick of listening to me. So that's why I do it.
Nice. Yeah. So I was looking at a little bit of this trailer for The Visitation, and Is
it
I'm seeing
available?
some of these camera angles and some of the camera movement for the scenes in this trailer. I'm like, I don't know about this one.
It is a dated Christian film for sure. Is it even available to stream anywhere?
It's for rent or buy on Amazon. So I'm gonna pass.
It's starring Randy Travis, though, and Edward Furlong. No, that is definitely one that is a nostalgia trip for me.
You said Randy Travis is Travis Jordan. Randy Travis is a country music singer.
Yeah, he's in it too.
Wait, what? Really? Oh.
Yeah. There's
Travis Jordan.
Martin Donovan plays Travis Jordan. Randy Travis plays Kyle Sherman.
Oh yeah, she right there. Oh damn. Okay. All right.
This might be one that's like, oh, I forgot he's in it too. Wow. Noah Sagan, who's also in Star Wars, Knives Out, Poker Face. Wow. Okay.
Oh, Patrick Swayze's bro, Don Swayze.
So if I buy it, I'll give you my password. We can talk. I'm sure. I haven't seen that movie in probably 20 years. I'm sure it is bad.
Good Lord.
But it would be a trip down memory lane for me.
Nice.
All right.
For some reason, I saw the cover and it made me think for some reason of The Prophecy. I don't know. Have you ever seen that?
Yes. Very similar.
Christopher Walken. Have you seen all the Prophecy films?
No. But I think
check out the rest of them.
I think the idea, they are definitely hitting that target market.
Yeah. Check out, if you've seen the Prophecy, the first Prophecy, check out Prophecy 2. I think there's like 4 films, but the second one's pretty good. Chris Falken's in that one also. And like that angel character, it just gets crazier, but goofier as the films go on.
Yeah. Cool. I've seen the box set. I'm interested in all of those things.
Oh yeah, dude! Compilation DVDs of multiple films for a series. I'll snatch those up at Walmart real quick and easy.
I always look at Arrow Video, Vinegar Syndrome. They do some awesome like box sets. But is that all? Is that all you have to say for this one?
Yeah, that's it.
All right, that is where I'm at on this one too. I'm not going to tell you what the next movie is because I'm not sure when things are going to be released because we'll see what's happening at the box office. I think by the time this comes out, Godzilla will have come out, and I definitely want to talk about that one.
I'm way behind on all the King Kong Godzilla movie stuffs and co-opted things. I just haven't seen any of it. All I've got right now is Max Hulu and Crunchyroll, and then just the free streaming stuff or whatever. So I don't know.
We do the socialist method with my family, where I pay for one of them, my brother pays for another one, and we all share the passwords and have access. But nice. The recent Godzilla stuff is all on Max. You don't have to watch that if you don't want to. So,
well, no, I'm just lazy. Yeah. There's always other stuff I'm doing or watching, and it's like I have a list of things that I just haven't gotten around to watching all of them yet. Just like I've got all these games that I haven't finished playing.
I've got a book with me at all times, so I usually try to read that and then watch a movie once or twice a week, and then I do this too. So, all right, well, Jonathan, thanks for joining me and talking about this. Thanks for bringing the movie.
You're welcome.
I'm excited to get into some of the others. So for the listeners who are listening, go check out the movie yourself. I originally watched it on Tubi. It was not on Tubi for my second watch, and I watched it on YouTube. And that definitely leaned into the Goosebumps feel, because that quality was a little bit lower. It looked like a VHS rip, but it was awesome to go into that. But
nostalgia.
Yes, check it out on YouTube. Leave us a review. Let us know what you think. We'll include that into our average. Or if you're just watching any movie as it comes out, go to our Instagram profile, hit that link tree, submit your review, and I'll get it posted. I'll get it posted on social media, whether we do an episode about it. So we'll be mixing it up. You'll see a lot of weird movies that you haven't heard of. You might see some recent box office films this year. We'll just see what's coming out and if we feel like talking about it. So thanks for joining us.
Glad to be. Thanks for